Hello and welcome to the Berry Tramel Show. We've got a very special guest today. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey will join us to talk about the Sooners moving to the Southeastern Conference. First of all, we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Next Generation Roofing, Two Fellas Moving, Weedman Lawn Service, FirelakesJobs.com, Oklahoma's Ford Dealers, and Oklahoma's 988 Helpline. When it comes to Two Fellows, let's face it, a box of pizza and a case of beer just don't work like they used to. Nobody wants to help you move, but we know how Two Fellas love that moving. At Two Fellas Moving Company, they offer free, no-strings quotes for your move. With over 20 years' experience, they've pretty much moved it all. Their services don't end at moving. You need to do some remodeling or spring cleaning, they have you covered. With dumpster rentals and junk haul services, remember, quotes are free and there are no strings attached. If you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellows. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today. And now we welcome in SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Welcome to the show, and thanks for welcoming Oklahoma into the Southeastern Conference.
Well, it's great to be with you. It seems like it's been a long time in the making since the announcement in the summer of 21. And as we near the end of football season, it just ramps up the interest in what's to come for us next fall. Next time we kick off will be a 16-member conference with Oklahoma and Texas involved. So it's a pretty exciting future that lies ahead.
What was it about Oklahoma and Texas that made you say, hey, this is going to be a good idea for the SEC?
One was their interest. I think first and foremost, you want people who want to be a part of your organization. And it's not like everybody who calls has the same reaction. Their commitment to high-level college athletics within a leading university context is consistent with what happens around our 14 members. I think you begin there, and then you look regionally. We extended our geography by right around 100 miles total for most of our trips. Maximum, we shortened some season-long travel for others. I joked with Joe a little bit. I said, we used to win softball and gymnastics here pretty regularly, and we keep finishing second. So we need to invite you in so we can be part of that celebration again. But I think that's a testament to how both of our new universities will make us better. The thought that a rising tide lifts all boats is real. And so we challenge ourselves regularly, and we're going to challenge our new friends from Oklahoma and Texas, and they'll challenge us to improve as a league and as individual entities as well.
You mentioned the geographic stretching, 100 miles. It doesn't seem like that much considering what's going on in college athletics. How pleased are you that your expansion has really maintained geographic sanity? Border states, in the case of Texas, already had a school in that state. Right. Norman is about 3 hours, 3.5 from Fayetteville. So were you pleased that you were able to expand the league like this, but also maintaining some semblance of geographic sanity?
Very much so. Very much a point of pride that, again, we generated the interest from the two universities that they introduced, that we kept our footprint in really a common sense framework. So we're not flying across country. We're not asking young people to spend 4 hours on an airplane, fly back to campus through the middle of the night after a tough competition. We might get back late, but our cities are accessible. And then I think uniquely we restore a lot of rivalries. We obviously have a bit of disruption, but Texas A&M playing Texas again, Texas playing Arkansas, people forget the importance of history that's present in that matchup. Oklahoma and Missouri comprise 1/4 of the old Big 8 conference. And so they've got a history together. Those two wrestling programs even have a lot of history. So there's a lot that's to be proud of. But I think the fact that we moved early generated a level of criticism, but I think has been proven to absolutely be the right decision given what's played out since our decision in 21.
We're now 2.5 years since that decision. What have you learned about the Sooners and the Longhorns in those 2.5 years? Clearly, you did a lot of research, did a lot of investigation. Clearly, you got to know them well before the announcement. But what have you learned since then in these 2.5 years?
Well, a few things. One, I'll start with my experience this fall in Dallas. I had literally, having lived in Dallas for 11 years, when I was in the Southland Conference office and I was their commissioner for 7 football seasons, I would drive out of town passing the traffic traveling to the state fair game as I headed to a game in Nacogdoches, Texas, or Huntsville, Texas, or someplace in my old conference. But I'd never been inside to experience that rivalry. And that was a wow moment for me. And I see a lot of special competitions and huge games. And we have neutral site games, but the level of fervor in the Cotton Bowl Stadium on that particular Saturday, not to mention what happens outside, was pretty special. So that was like a live learning experience for me. Going back and looking at the research, I spoke a moment ago about the rivalries and relationships that existed. Now it seems like that's common sense. That would have been apparent as we started, but you do forget the history between some of our universities and our 2 new members in Oklahoma and Texas. So digging into that, the impact on their states. So obviously we've lived with Texas A&M, what they mean to the state of Texas. They have a colleague institution now being added to that. My grandfather grew up in a place called Chouteau, Oklahoma, so I was familiar with the state and had observed from afar, because I have aunts and uncles who were Oklahoma fans when I was a kid, their level of success through the 70s, 80s, and what they've experienced recently. But learning, I have a daughter who's a meteorologist, and learning about the impact of the meteorology sciences that are present on the Oklahoma campus and all around the Norman area. Learning about the Oklahoma City and how that complements the cities we have here, just a short drive from Norman. I think what you figured out is it's really a complementary relationship to who we are. I think the intensity of the fans, the expectations being high. As soon as we finish this season, whatever happens with bowl games and football, next year, instead of having 14 schools convinced that it's their year to win the national championship, we'll have 16. So that's a common feeling is what we've experienced and learned.
Well, let me say, my dad is from Mays County, Oklahoma. Chouteau is in Mays County. I know Chouteau very well. So that's a cool connection.
Yep.
Let me ask you, what will Oklahoma and Texas learn, do you think, about the SEC once they get inside that maybe they don't know now?
I'll start with a smile on my face. We have great destinations to experience. And I could go down the list. I think every one of our communities is pretty special in its own way. And they'll be welcomed. And then all of a sudden, when we kick off, it won't be quite as welcoming. So I think they'll experience that. And that will be true in football, obviously, but it'll play through the softball season. So that's one. I think second is there is a level of intensity that I think, Barry, is very unique on a week-to-week basis. So as we speak, we saw just an incredible game in Columbia, Missouri this past Saturday, a few days ago from this recording, Florida at Missouri. 15 years ago, that game wasn't even envisioned being played, but I went right down literally to the last second. And it showed you the intensity that is there week to week. And it's easy to see that in football. But again, as you go through the fall and volleyball and in soccer, you transition into basketball, the intensity around our softball and our baseball, where every week it's high level competition. I think that is, and I mean this respectfully for other colleague conferences, I think that's unique here. I think it's unique in football, and it's unique through the entire year. There's a pride, too, that becomes instilled in people. I'll go to Texas A&M in Missouri, both when they joined. When I made my first trip to College Station, it was November of 2011. They'd been welcomed in an announcement in September of 2011. When I went to that first football game, I was not the commissioner. I was in an associate commissioner role. The number of SEC logos I saw displayed in tailgating and in parking lots was beyond expectation because of that sense of pride that we're part of a unique group. And so I would expect that same sense of pride is being felt now, because I've heard it when I was at that OU Texas game, just the fans welcoming me to them, their community, and indicating let's get this thing moving as quick as we can, which we've done. I think that's kind of the special spirit that they'll experience as well.
You mentioned that we're around the Thanksgiving weekend. If you look at the SEC schedule, the SEC institutions, most of them have a traditional Thanksgiving week game rivalry. Arkansas has sort of migrated from LSU to Missouri in recent years. Texas A&M, I assume, will take over with Texas on that weekend. But there's about 4 schools that don't have one. Is it safe to assume that Oklahoma is one without Bedlam? Will the Sooners just be migrated into one of those schools that sort of need a Thanksgiving partner?
We're just a few weeks away from announcing the dates. So if you remember, in mid-June, we announced the opponents and the locations. We haven't announced dates. And so I'm gonna hold a little bit of that answer, if you will. But I'm also going to go back to that Florida-Missouri example where we have this unique ability to develop rivalries pretty fast in this league. And so we have some plans for 24, and we'll be at 8 games for certain on how those last week matchups will play out without, again, giving anything away. So stay tuned. And then we have a decision about 25 and beyond. Should we stay at 8 conference games or move to 9? And the approach on the last weekend will vary based on the number of games we play. So maybe a little bit more flexibility on those season-ending games. Whatever they are, we know they'll be special. And again, I could go back to any number of examples. I was at Ole Miss at Georgia, and the intensity that Saturday evening in Athens, Georgia, for teams that don't play every year was off the charts. And so we've got a number of opportunities to either match up what would be considered rivals or create these annual opponents that will in no time see themselves as lifelong rivals quite quickly.
Is the state of scheduling 8 versus 9, it's been bandied about, for a couple of years now. How much of that is tied in to just mystery about the new playoff format that you and Bob Bowlesby were on the committee that helped put that together? How much of that is just unknown about how that will all play out?
Well, there's a piece of that, and we're living it right now. So we're recording on a Tuesday. We'll see the next to last selections introduced. We've got another Tuesday and then the final selection. And so another year of information we decided would help us in our decision-making around the number of conference games moving forward. Even though we don't have a 12-team format, just another data set is helpful. So this will be the 10th 4-team playoff. We've run all kinds of analysis off of the previous 9. So one more was desired. So that's one. We also have programs that are interested in bowl qualification. And some of those you'll see, you look at Missouri in the top 10 this year, they'd be right in the heart of a 12-team playoff conversation next year. But there's a building process that's taken place, or really a rebuilding, because they made our championship game a couple times early in their tenure here. And you want that. So part of it, Barry, is learning about the rigor of our schedule and its impact on accessing bowl games. We also have ongoing discussions with our media partner about the right way to configure our schedule. We're not being dictated to. That's a collaborative point of dialogue. We also know from a non-conference standpoint, we've required a big-time non-conference game from all of our schools. And then they have different approaches to how they schedule the remaining non-conference games. We want to be careful about decision-making around just walking away from some of those games, and that takes a little bit of time. So that's just a representation of some of the data points. There are a couple others. But the short, what happens in the postseason matters greatly to us. And this chance to learn and discuss a little bit more is enormously helpful in our process.
You mentioned talking about walking away from a rival, these are my words, not yours. Florida State, South Carolina, Clemson, Louisville, Kentucky, whoever. We've got that in our state with Bedlam going away. Is it a case of the same thing that we've seen here in Oklahoma? Is it possible that some of those traditional rivalries could be sacrificed in the name of more conference games?
I think our history has indicated a desire to accommodate those non-conference in-state games. Louisville and Kentucky. As Louisville moved conferences, that in-state rivalry continued. Clemson and South Carolina, keeping in mind South Carolina once left the ACC and they still play that game. And FSU in Florida. One of the interesting ones for me is Georgia Tech was a founding member of the Southeastern Conference, but has had this long and continuing play with Georgia even after departure, which is to indicate we've shown a healthy respect for accommodating those games, knowing what they mean to local communities. And we've indicated the same given the current transition with Oklahoma and Texas joining us. Now, where those games fit would be a little bit of a different point of conversation because you can't have an odd number of those games. But we're more than willing to be a part of that conversation should people want those games to continue. And, that one is for me to accommodate and for others to decide. How's that for a description?
That's good. That's good. Let's switch sports for a second. Basketball. Here in Big 12 country, Brett Yormark has made a point of emphasis. He says he thinks basketball can be elevated in terms of marketability and profitability. SEC basketball has been very successful, well traveled in terms of the highest ranks of the NCAA tournament. Where is SEC basketball in your mind, and is there potential for future growth in that sport?
I'll go back to my first year. So, in fact, I'll go back. How about to my college years in the 80s? I wanted to be a basketball coach and have a great affinity for the sport, wanted to learn as much as I could in the 80s. I can quote the coaching clinics I attended, just trying to exist as a sponge and learn more. And the game's advanced so far beyond where I was. And I ended up in this athletics administration work. So, but I've always had an interest in basketball. Way back, I told you I was in the Southland Conference. We were a perennial 16 seed. We went through discussions about how do we improve our position from the bottom to a point where some teams in that league had won NCAA tournament games. When I started as commissioner back in the summer of 2015, I knew we needed to change the discussion we were having around the culture of basketball. Kind of the ecosystem is the cool term. Fast forward to March of 2016, one of the low points of my time as commissioner, we only had 3 teams selected to the NCAA men's basketball tournament that year. That's not the expectation we have for ourselves. So forget comparisons to anyone else, forget, economic impact. Our just competitive expectations are well beyond having 3 teams selected in the NCAA tournament. And one of those 3 teams was in Dayton, just barely in as the 3rd team. And so we went through some change because I think my responsibility is to make sure we have a foundation to support the success of our teams. On our campuses, we invested in practice facilities and coaches, coaching staffs. Fast forward the last couple of years, we've sustained the highest number of SEC teams selected into the NCAA tournament in our history. And as we add 2 perennial NCAA tournament programs like Oklahoma and Texas, yeah, we expect that number to grow. There is the opportunity for growth. This year, when I talk to people outside of my footprint, commentators, basketball experts, they tell me that our competition, if everybody stays healthy, may be at the highest level it's ever been. Now, me saying that is like the commissioner is supposed to say nice things about his conference, right? But I think we're starting to see it as the season plays out. We're just a couple of weeks in. We haven't won every non-conference game. We've performed pretty well throughout the league. You're always going to have some odd losses. And we're going to be in a conversation about what does the future look like for our schedule? How do we continue to schedule intelligently as a league? In our non-conference games, we added a challenge with the Atlantic Coast Conference that starts a week from now. So we're recording on the 21st. November 28th, we pivot away from our old Big 12 challenge into a new era with the ACC. I think that's exciting given their basketball history, given the time of year. So I very much think on the men's side, there's a lot of upside. On the women's side, we've won the last 2 national championships. We bring Vic Schaefer back in the league. I've watched the investment that Joe's made in the Sooners women's program as it reasserts itself from a strength standpoint. So I'm actually excited about both our women's and our men's basketball as we go forward and think on both sides, even though we've won the last 2 national championships with 2 different teams, that growth will continue for women's basketball and for men's basketball.
Another sport near and dear to Oklahoman's heart is softball. You referenced it early. Sooners, of course, have a powerhouse program. Texas is very good. The SEC model for the conference tournament is to rotate it among the campuses. Here in Oklahoma City, we have the world's best softball park, home of the Women's World Series. Is there any talk afoot about potentially putting the SEC tournament in a locked location, and in particular Oklahoma City?
Yeah, we've in our footprint, we've traditionally not had facilities as nice as our campus facilities. So I think one of the things that our new members will see as they travel around, we have outstanding softball facilities. And so part of our philosophy has been to honor that investment and bring people to different places over time. From where I sit, it is absolutely a reasonable and appropriate conversation to talk about a continual site for our championships. And given what's there in Oklahoma, we've kind of waded into that, knowing there's some existing relationships. But I think long term that needs to be a central part of our softball conversation.
Lastly, let's talk a little bit about Greg Sankey, raised in upstate New York, been to university at a variety of places, including Texas and back east. Tell us a little bit about your road. You became the Southland Conference Commissioner. Sort of, in my mind, a meteoric rise to one of the most influential people in college athletics. How did Greg Sankey get here?
Meteoric may be a way to describe it, and I tell people when I speak. So young students in college settings, we have volunteers I'll speak to at our championship game. I see. One of the realities you have to think about is you see me now, so we're on a Zoom. You can see my office in Birmingham, nice place, a lot of mementos. You don't see me then. You don't see when my wife and I had been married 8 months and we moved from Utica, New York, where my first job was, where we lived when we got married, packed up everything we owned in a budget rented truck and drove from Utica, New York to Natchitoches, Louisiana, where I was a $500 a month intern. And the movie Steel Magnolias had just finished filming in Natchitoches, and we were kind of thrown right into that culture. I think Kathy, my wife, would agree. We just passed 35 years of marriage. It was the best thing that could have happened to our relationship, and ultimately set me on a course of answering a question that Kathy and I had discussed in early 1989, which is, I wonder if I can work in Division I college sports, and if I can, how far might it go? And it's gone pretty far. Part of what made it happen is the ability to take some risks. The cliche is to bet on myself, to bet on ourselves, to say, I wonder if I could work in a Division I setting. Northwestern State University isn't exactly at the top of the competitive heap, but allowed me an opportunity to go someplace where I could learn and grow. Did that for a few years, moved to the Dallas area, worked in the Southland Conference as an assistant commissioner. A guy named Britt Banowski, who's an Oklahoma alum, his dad was president back in the 80s, was a friend and a colleague who eventually became their commissioner. I followed Britton when he went back to work for the Big 12 when it was first formed in the mid-90s. I became the Southland commissioner. I was 31 years old. You probably shouldn't appoint a 31-year-old as a Division I conference commissioner, but the presidents of that league had enough confidence in me. It allowed me to make decisions, live at the end of the hallway, so to speak, make mistakes kind of off Broadway. One time traveled to Stillwater to watch Northwestern State play Oklahoma State when Les Miles was coaching there. My first trip to Austin was at the invitation of meeting DeLoss Dodds. I had a sister-in-law and her husband who lived in Norman when he was at an Air Force base nearby. So it gave me these great experiences when I had taken these different roles. And then, oddly enough, my predecessor here, Mike Slive, we were in the old NCAA Kansas City headquarters at a reception in 1997, and he asked me to tell my story. And when I got to that Utica, New York part, where my first job was at Utica College, strangely enough, Mike Slive, the seventh commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, was born and raised in Utica, New York, which is about an hour and a half drive from where I was born and raised near Auburn, New York. And so that developed a friendship in the late 90s. He and I worked on some committees together. And one day in the summer of 2002, he had just started literally working in the office I now occupy. And I called him because I was interviewing for the Conference USA commissioner's job that he had vacated. And I said, Mike, what's going on? He said, look, I don't know what's going on with my old job. I've got enough going on here. And he said, by the way, I've got an opportunity, a position I need to fill. Would you have an interest? And it was a hard month. This was back in the summer of 2002, early fall. Should I leave Dallas? My two children were born there. We had great friends, went to a church, loved the work I did, kind of leading to come here as an associate commissioner, dealt with compliance issues. And, stayed here, had some opportunities to leave, almost left a couple of times. And really towards about 2010, 11, just wondered how things might play out, just decided to be patient is one of the lessons. And we went through a search in the fall of 2014. Sadly, Mike was diagnosed with cancer that he had fought before, announced his retirement, went through a search, and I took over in the summer of 2015. So if you go back to the beginning of that story, Barry, I could never have predicted I'd be in this role. In fact, my wife and I were married the first weekend in November, which you don't do if you're going to be the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. That's like Alabama LSU weekend typically. And then the willingness to really step outside my comfort zone, to ask a couple of questions about what opportunities do I want to take, where do I want to be, have a bit of vision, take chances, never put money first. I typically would leave a job for less money because that new job gave me the chance to learn and grow. Tried to be patient, probably wasn't always patient, but patience ended up paying off. And now I'm hopefully successfully going to finish my 9th football season over the next couple of weeks as commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. And that's a great honor. And as I said before, asking the question was literally in February 1989 when Kathy and I were talking about what might lay ahead. And I said, I wonder if I can work in Division I college sports, and if I can, how far might it go? I've done a pretty good job answering that question.
Well, you talked about finishing 9 SEC football seasons. I think you've either finished 41 or 43 marathons.
41.
41 marathons. That's a world that's unknown to me. Let me ask you a question. When you're running marathons, Is your mind just racing, and you're fixing all the problems that afflict the Southeastern Conference or college athletics, or are you able to check out when you're
No,
on the roadway?
yeah, no, that's a really important question for kind of why I run. So I've not had the time to train for a marathon since I've been SEC commissioner. That's a pretty good time commitment. So most of those were between about 2005 and 2012. And I did it because there was mental therapy. So obviously cardiovascular fitness, but to just go run, sometimes just turn it off and get lost in your own breathing and the sound of your feet on the trail or the pavement. Look around and see what's happening around you. So I would do that. Sometimes I would assign myself a task, and I ran 3.5 miles this morning. I was listening to a podcast about some of the congressional activity on funding the government and thinking through what that means as we end up on Capitol Hill with a level of frequency, how politics plays into some of what we do. And then there's other times where I just pop on YouTube and hit the playlist and go. But I think at the center of all of that has been the ability to get outdoors. I don't run indoors on a treadmill, even in bad weather. And to breathe deeply, appreciate what's around me, and kind of separate from the rest of my day. I think for me, that's been healthy physically, but also healthy mentally and emotionally.
Well, fantastic. Well, Greg, we sure appreciate you joining us. Great opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, get some of your perspective on this strange new world of the SEC that the Sooners are about to embark upon. And we look forward to working with you as Oklahoma joins this premier conference of college athletics.
Thank you, Barry. I appreciate the invitation and the conversation, and we are excited about our future. I think the move to 16 will just magnify on each of our campuses and collectively as a conference who we are, what we do, and the young people who choose to be a part of it. So I'm really looking forward to the next few years that are ahead of us.
Well, thanks a lot. And remember, join us next week for the Berry Tramel Show. Go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify. Get on there and subscribe. We will talk to you next week.